chuck, brisket, Denver steak, filet, porterhouse. What do all these words even mean? You see them on packages at the grocery store. Do you really know what that cut of meat is? Today I want to explain all these terms and demystify the cuts of meat on a cow. Let's get to it. Here's a diagram of the cow and how it's broken down into different primal cuts. Primal cuts are basically those first cuts that are made from when they break down a cow. So we're talking about the chuck, the round, the short plate, the brisket. These are all terms that are large cuts of meat that require further breakdown as we go down the chain. An example is like we're going to take the chuck primal cut and we'll get a chuck roll from it. That'll be the sub-primal cut. And then from that chuck roll, we will cut Denver steaks. So you can see that how we go from the bigger cut to the smaller cut as it gets to the grocery store. Here are some other examples. In the short loin, you can get a beef tenderloin. From that beef tenderloin, you can then get a filet mignon. You take that same short loin and cut a different piece. You cut the New York strip loin off there. And then you get a New York strip steak. So you can see that from the same primal cut, so many different options of different retail cuts from each primal cut. Next, let's talk about where to buy these things. Because if you're shopping for primal cuts, sub-primal cuts, you're gonna have to go to different places. So basically what's gonna happen is if you wanna get primal cuts, you wanna get the biggest cuts possible, then you're gonna have to go right to a rancher and a processor and buy the whole cow. Buy a whole cow, buy a half a cow, something like that. And then you go, and then that meat is shipped to a processor in which they will cut it to your specifications. If you want subprimal cuts, ribeyes, tenderloins, strip loins, then you're gonna have to go to a membership club, like a Costco or a Sam's or a Chef's store. Those are good places for you to get big subprimal cuts. Do these projects like we do on this channel all the time. If you want to get the individual steaks, so I want to get a filet mignon, a New York strip, I just want one, I just want two, then that's where you go to a grocery store or butcher shop. So you can see that different places are going to have the different pieces of meat along that same channel. Next, I want to talk about grading. Grades are so much different because grades are a voluntary process that's done by the rancher themselves so they can sell their meat for a higher price. Those grades, prime, choice, select. Those are the top three that you're gonna see anywhere in the grocery store. Prime, choice, select. You'll notice that I didn't say the words Angus, Wagyu, or Kobe. Now, those are all different varieties and breeds of cattle and have their own kind of grading system. So that's completely different than your prime, choice, and select beef that you get in the grocery store. Next, I wanna talk about tenderness versus flavor. So each one of these different cuts of beef have a different flavor profile and have a different tenderness profile. A good rule of thumb is the cuts that are furthest away from the hoof and the horn are the most tender. So that's your tenderness. But you'll see an inverse relationship to the flavor profile. That's why your most flavorful cuts of beef are usually not the most tender. They require long, slow cooking, whether you're doing a brisket or short ribs. Those are great, flavorful cuts of meat that require, but they're not tender at all. So you gotta cook them a little longer. The more work the muscle group gets, the less tender it is, the tougher it is. But it also probably has a little more flavor. You'll see a lot of ground beef comes from the round, comes from the chuck, comes from that part of the sirloin, something like that. They're tougher cuts of meat that really aid in the grinding process. So to break down those muscle fibers. I want to break down the top 10 steak cuts sold in the United States. And I want to tell you where they come from, and I'm going to show you on the diagram where they come from. So number 10 comes out at the skirt steak. So the skirt steak is great for quick dry heat cooking, tacos, things like that. Skirt steak is delicious, has a great flavor, but it comes from the short plate. So you'll see from the diagram that it is an area of the cow that's really close to the hoof and gets a lot of work. So you can't cook it very long or it gets tough, or you have to cook it a long time for it to shred apart. Number 9 is the flat iron steak. Now I've done a flat iron steak video and I love a flat iron steak. It is in the chuck, but it is in that part of the chuck that has really good beefy flavor, and the flat iron steak is a tiny muscle in there that really lends well to dry heat cooking. So grilling, sauteing, just don't overcook it, but it has great beefy flavor. Number 8 is the Denver steak. Now, Denver steak is also in the chuck. It's in a different part, the chuck roll, which we've done several times on this channel. And that is also one of those secret butcher cuts. The secret butcher cuts that have great beefy flavor and that are pretty tender as long as you don't overcook them. Keep them medium rare, it's delicious. And it's like that secret cut that'll impress your friends because like, what is a Denver steak? Oh yeah, it's this cool steak you never heard of that you should know about. Number 7, New York strip. I don't have to explain that too much. New York strip is at every steakhouse across America. So it is a good, I like the New York strips because it's somewhere in between the tenderloin and the ribeye, so it's leaner than a ribeye, but it has more flavor than a tenderloin. It's right there in the middle. It has some character. I really like the New York strip, and it comes from the strip, or it comes from the short loin portion of the cow. Number 6 is top sirloin. No surprise there, comes from the sirloin primal cut. The top sirloin is also where you'll find picanha. Now, picanha has been made popular by Brazilian steakhouses. You'll see this iconic thing of the picanha on a sword or a skewer, cutting off that top sirloin, that picanha, in those all-you-can-eat Brazilian-style steakhouses. The next is the hanger steak. Now, the hanger steak was known as the butcher steak for a long time because the butchers would take home that little hanger steak for their families. It is in the short plate, which is the short plate, again, very tough, usually where you find your short ribs and things like that, but there's a little piece of meat that doesn't get a lot of work in there that really is tender and flavorful and delicious. So if you can get your hands on a hanger steak, they're hard to find because there's only 2 of them and on the whole cow, and they're not very big, but they are delicious. Number 3 is the filet mignon. I don't have to explain what a filet mignon is. It comes from the short loin. It is the most tender cut on the entire animal, and you know, it's very, very popular at all steakhouses across the country. So it doesn't have as much flavor as some of the other steak cuts we've mentioned today, but you know, that is the king of steaks, the most expensive of all the steaks. Number 2 is a porterhouse. Now, a porterhouse is interesting. I'm going to say porterhouse / T-bone because porterhouses and T-bones are the same cut. Half of it is a New York strip and half of it is a tenderloin. As they cut down the short loin, if you have a big portion of the filet, then that is a porterhouse. Then as they cut down, that filet gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So after a certain point, it's now a T-bone. Still has a big New York strip, but has a tiny filet, that's a T-bone. This is the Butcher Wizard 6-inch boning knife. This is great for intricate projects such as breaking down a whole beef tenderloin, filleting a fish, deboning an entire chicken. This is the tool that you need. You can get in all the little nooks and crannies you need to cut through when you're breaking down these bigger cuts. The stainless steel blade is easy to clean and sharpen. There's no crazy maintenance that's needed. This is your number 1 tool in the kitchen if you're gonna break down meat. Number 1 is the ribeye. It's the most popular steak cut in the country. Everybody loves a ribeye. There's bone-in ribeyes, there's tomahawk ribeyes. We'll get into that another time. But like very, very popular. A lot of intermuscular fat, a lot of great beefy flavor. It is the most popular for a reason. So those are our top 10 beef cuts. Now you should be armed with the information to go to the grocery store and know which primal cut your meat has come from and what to do with it. So check out the next video. It should be floating around over here. Click it and let me know if you like it.